Good morning, everybody. My name is Robbie. I'm a ministry assistant here, and I'm so honored to be up here talking with you guys today in the second of our four-part series, Grace is Greater. The premise of this series is more or less a math equation, but the easy kind, so I can do it. Right? The premise of these 4 weeks is simply this, that grace is greater than blank. Whatever your mind can think of to fill that blank in with, we believe that grace is greater. Right? Grace is greater than everything. Last week, Pastor Lance talked to us about how grace is greater than our mistakes, than the sin that we've committed and the shame that we feel and the guilt that we have, the regrets that we have. Grace is bigger than all of it. Now, grace is a fun thing to teach about. Because grace is it's one of those concepts that you can read about, and you can hear a talk about it. You can even hear a really good talk about grace from this awesome guy with a wicked beard. And if you don't experience grace for yourself, you're still not going to get it. Right? But see, when you have experienced grace, when you've experienced grace for yourself, it changes you. It transforms your life. So when you get a whole group of people who've experienced this grace in their life, and they come together, they celebrate it. Right? That's what we are. We're a community of people who've experienced the grace of God, and we come together to celebrate that grace that He's shown us, and even more, celebrate God who gives us that grace. Imagine if all of us were sentenced to life in prison. Don't imagine why. Can't think of something that bad that every single one of us could do. But imagine we're all sentenced to life in prison, and then the charges are dropped and we're set free. Imagine if every single one of us here was diagnosed with a terminal illness and there was no cure, and then all of a sudden the cure was there and we were saved. Right? Would you not get excited? Would you not be wanting to celebrate every day, right? That's what we are. Right? We're a community of grace who comes together to celebrate. Now, we like to celebrate grace when we're the ones receiving it, right? It's awesome. But I think we have a hard time celebrating grace when we're expected to show grace to others. So this week, we're going to flip grace around, and instead of looking at the grace that's flowing into us from God, we're going to look at what it looks like to show grace to other people. Because grace is awesome when you're the one receiving it, but grace gets a little bit messier, a little bit more painful when we're talking about grace towards your sibling who keeps bullying you, towards your spouse who cheated on you, towards the boss who fired you, or the friend who stabbed you in the back, the parent who berated you and ridiculed you, the relative who abused you. Grace coming from us and going to them, it's a little bit heavier. It's not something we like to talk about, is it? So today we're going to be looking at a passage of the Bible found in Matthew chapter 18. But before we turn there, I'm going to let you guys in on what we're talking about today. It's basically forgiveness and unforgiveness. And I know right now, if you're anything like me, you're thinking, oh, really? Why do we have to talk about unforgiveness? Why does this even matter? The reason you're asking that is because as soon as I said unforgiveness, a name popped into your head. There's a face there. You're seeing that person who hurt you, maybe even thinking about that thing that they did. You're like, no, I don't want to go there. But do you know how important forgiveness is? Not even just from the perspective of what the Bible says, but let's take a look at what a medical doctor, Dr. Karen Swartz, she's the director of the Mood Disorders Adult Consultation Clinic at the Johns Hopkins Hospital. There's words in there that I had a hard time pronouncing, so you know she's smart. And look at what she says. There is an enormous physical burden in being hurt. Chronic anger puts you into a fight or flight mode, which results in numerous changes in heart rate, blood disease, and diabetes, among other conditions. Forgiveness, however, calms stress levels, leading to improved health. More research that I looked at shows us that people who hold unforgiveness, it increases their stress levels, which of course increases the risk of heart disease and stuff like we just saw there, but it also makes them more susceptible to mood disorders like depression and anxiety. Keeps you from sleeping at night, which we all know contributes to more of that. So unforgiveness isn't just an emotional thing. Unforgiveness is a toxin that turns your body against you and makes you more susceptible to diseases of the mind and the body. And even listening to that, I know there's some people out here who think, okay, I hear that, but I still don't want to forgive. Because sometimes, even knowing how detrimental unforgiveness is, the thought of forgiving that person for that awful thing they did still hurts more. So with that in mind, let's pick up our story in Matthew 18. We're going to start at verse 21, where Peter comes up to Jesus with a question. So Peter came to him and asked, "Lord, how often should I forgive someone who has sinned against me?" 7 times. I love that. Peter's like, seven times. So seems like a random number, but in this day, rabbis, the Jewish teachers of the Bible, were like, okay, you know what? You got to forgive people. Like once, yeah. Twice, yeah. 3 times, yeah. 4 times, no, game over. Like 4 times, you're done. It's okay. Like God won't care at that point. So Peter's thinking, okay, all right, Jesus, how many times should I forgive someone? Like, would you say, I don't know, 7? Like 7 times? Or is that just what I would say? He's thinking he's being really gracious here. So he's expecting Jesus to give him a compliment, be all like, man, Peter, 7 times? Wow. Like, why can't all the other disciples be as gracious as you, Peter? But see, 7's still a kind of odd number to just pick out. Maybe 10. If I were Peter, I would have just said 10 if it was a random thing. See, I think he said 7 because when Peter came to ask Jesus this question, he was thinking of someone who recently hurt him, probably someone pretty close to him, because we all know the deepest hurts come from those we love and trust, right? And I bet that person hurt Peter not once, not twice, but exactly 7 times. And Peter was just ready to be done with it. So he's like, Jesus, let me give you this equation here. I know you said grace is great. Like grace is big, and I'm getting what you're saying, and forgiveness and all that, but grace is less than 7, right? Right? Don't you sometimes feel like asking Jesus this too? It can't just be me who wants to be like, Jesus, I get what you're saying, but like that thing that person keeps doing it. Maybe it's not even like 7 times. Maybe for you it's like 1 hurt, but it's times 7 because it is so massive. Like the damage they've done to you, Jesus can't expect you to forgive that, right? So I don't think Peter's alone in wanting to ask Jesus this question. But Jesus goes on and he says, no, Peter, grace is still greater than 7. Like that hurt that you've got going on, Peter, that person who keeps on hurting you, I get it, but I still expect you to forgive them. Let's take a look at Jesus' response in verse 22. No, not 7 times, Jesus replied, but 70 times 7. Now, I know what some of us are thinking, because this was me the first time I read this. I'm going to be honest, right? I was like, okay, so 70 times 7, so that's like a big number. I don't have my calculator, but if I added 1 more, grace would be less than that, right? Like grace is not greater than 70 times 7 plus 1, right? Because that's how bad I'm hurting right now. Like that is how awful this person has been to me. That is the damage that has been done, the scars that I've been carrying around since childhood. Right? So grace can't be greater than that, right, Jesus? But that isn't what Jesus is saying, guys. He's saying no. Like, Peter, it's not 7 times. Grace is just always greater. It's always greater than, never less than. Never less than. And for those of us who are Christian, we might say, yeah, like Jesus said it, so it's true. I don't feel like it's true. I don't want to live like it's true, but Jesus said it, so it's got to be true, right? Please say I'm not the only one thinking that, right? So Jesus tells a story to help us understand this concept that he's talking about, that grace is just always greater than. So let's pick up this story. It starts in verse 25. So therefore the kingdom of heaven can be compared to a king who decided to bring his accounts up to date with servants who had borrowed money from him. In the process, one of his debtors was brought in who owed him millions of dollars. Big rich guy decides, okay, I'm going to call in my debts. He finds out the servant owes him millions, like huge debt. Does anyone here owe millions? Good, no hands. That would be scary. I'd be like, dude, how'd you get that? I want to come to your house. Right. Story goes on. So he couldn't pay. So his master ordered that he be sold, along with his wife, his children, and everything he owned, to pay the debt. But the man fell down before his master and begged him, please be patient with me and I will pay it all. Yeah, right. How's he going to pay millions of dollars back? Like, I just don't believe it. Right? That guy's not going to pay. The master knows he's not going to pay. And Jesus knows that when we're listening to this story, we're going, yeah, there's no way that servant could ever pay that debt back. Jesus did that on purpose. He actually picked like an astronomically huge number. Like I did some loose calculations, and the number's somewhere in the figure of like $3,860,000,000. It's a lot of debt. The reason Jesus chose such a big number is this beginning of the story is meant to remind us of what we talked about last week. It's meant to remind us of our sin debt. That there is this big debt of sin, all these offenses against God, our rebellion against him, us turning our back on him and doing things our own way and hurting the people he loves, all of that builds up this massive sin debt that we can never pay back to God. Romans 3 verse 23 says, for everyone has sinned. We all fall short of God's glorious standard. Every single one of us. So when we listen to this story, remember that servant, he's us. We owe God, the master, a debt we can never pay. But like we talked about last week, God's grace is so much greater than all those mistakes, than that debt of sin. God forgives us. He wipes it clean. So what do we think the master is going to do? If this story is meant to reflect that sin debt, the master is going to forgive, right? So let's keep reading. The master was filled with pity for him, and he released him and forgave his debt. That verse is super important, and we're going to circle back to it. But first, I want to finish the story, because the story takes a twist here. So when the man left the king, he went to a fellow servant who owed him a few $1,000s. He grabbed him by the throat and demanded instant payment. His fellow servant fell down before him and begged for a little more time. Be patient with me, and I will pay it, he pleaded. Okay, so this servant has just been forgiven a massive debt. And now he goes to a fellow servant who owes him pretty big debt, like a few $1,000. I've worked it out somewhere around $8,000. It's a lot of money, right? It's not $3,860,000,000, but it's a pretty big debt. Nothing compared to what this guy's just been forgiven of, though. So of course, we expect him to forgive, right? But we read in verse 30, he wouldn't wait. He had the man arrested and put in prison until the debt could be paid in full. What a jerk. This guy's just been forgiven like billions of dollars, and he won't forgive $8,000. What a jerk. This next verse, it's easy to miss, but I think this is so important. When some of the other servants saw this, they were very upset. Other translations say outraged. Right? They went to the king and told him everything that had happened. Why do you think those servants were upset? Well, look at their master. Their master just forgave $1 billion debt to this servant. Right? This master, why was he lending billions of dollars to his servants in the first place? Like, this master is a nice guy. This is clearly a place where these servants are treated more like friends, right? Where grace is something that is shown and given and lived by. So when these servants see one of their own, someone who's just been given such a massive amount of grace, turn around and not give it to others, when he receives that grace and refuses to let grace flow, of course they're going to be upset. This is us. This is our community of grace, where each one of us who calls ourselves a Christian, who's been saved by God's grace, has received more grace than we could ever be expected to give in our lifetime. So we should be upset when we don't let grace flow. When someone walks through our doors who is different than us, and instead of being welcomed and loved like God loves them, we judge them because they look different than us, they act different than us. We should be upset by ungrace, whether it's judgment, whether it's legalism, trying to enforce law upon law to make people act the way we think they should act. That should get us upset. Like, look at Jesus. When he encountered sinners, as we read through the gospel, he was gracious to them. He loved them. He showed them mercy. And because of that, they turned from their sins. What did Jesus do when he met a hypocrite? Someone who thought they were better than everyone else and judged everyone else's sin? Then there was fighting words. So the moral of the story is Jesus only wants you to tell off hypocrites. I'm just kidding. That's not the actual moral, right? But we should be upset by ungrace. Let's keep reading. The story's not quite done yet. So the king finds out, right? The king called in the man he had forgiven and said, "You evil servant, I forgave you that tremendous debt because you pleaded with me. Shouldn't you have mercy on your fellow servant just as I had mercy on you?" Then the angry king sent the man to prison to be tortured until he had paid his entire debt. How long do you think that would take? Like, realistically, in prison, how long do you think it would take you to earn like $3,860,000,000? Is a safe guess like eternity? So what does that sound like to you? To me, that sounds like hell. Parable isn't over yet. The story Jesus is telling has this one verse that's troubling on first glance. So Jesus says, "That's what my heavenly Father will do to you if you refuse to forgive your brothers and sisters from your heart." Okay, so wait a minute. Is Jesus saying, if I'm shown this grace and I refuse to show it to others, God's going to send me to hell? Well, that's what we deserve. And if we were still trying to pay our own debt, that's what we get. But the beautiful thing is, grace. Grace is greater than every one of our mistakes, and that includes our refusal to forgive others. The grace of God in our lives isn't dependent on how much grace we show to other people. In the flow of the story, who forgives first, the master or the servant? It's the master. So, unless I'm mistaken here, and I've read the Bible enough to know I'm not, we are forgiven by God, period. Because of God's grace, period. Then he wants us to show forgiveness to others the way he's forgiven us. He wants us to show grace to others the way he's shown grace to us. Because God's grace towards us is not dependent on our grace towards others, but our grace towards others is only possible because of God's grace to us. Let's look at this verse in Colossians 3, verse 13. Right? As the Lord has forgiven you, so you also must forgive. Right? Not as you forgive others, the Lord must forgive you. Right? Flip that around. It's as the Lord has forgiven you, so you also must forgive. Jesus is saying, I've forgiven you of so much. I have shown you so much grace. I'm pouring so much grace into you. And all I'm asking is you to let that grace flow out of your life into those around you. right? Reflect my grace to those people who have hurt you. How the heck do we do that? That is hard. Forgiveness isn't easy. And if you've ever heard someone say forgiveness is easy, I'm sorry, but they were lying to you. They were trying to sell you something. Because forgiveness is hard. It is painful. Right? But the good news is, God is never asking you to forgive someone of more than he has forgiven you. Right? Let's look at this, the numbers here. 3,860,000,000 is greater than 8,000. It is. And 8,000 is a lot. Like, I'm not denying that there are people who have hurt you bad. There are people who have hurt me bad. Do they deserve to be forgiven? No. Did you deserve to be forgiven? Did I deserve to be forgiven? No. But God did it anyway, because he loves us that much. Right? I love this quote from C.S. Lewis, the author of the Narnia series. To be a Christian means to forgive the inexcusable because God has forgiven the inexcusable in you. It's true. I heard someone say once, if you aren't the worst sinner you don't know yourself very well. If you can't understand that you deserved nothing that God has given you, that it is all by his grace, that he chose to forgive you when there was nothing about you that earned it, you got to look in the mirror a little bit longer. Because only when we really understand that God's forgiven us of so much and what's been done to us really isn't that big, can we actually do it. Now, that's all good. But how the heck do we actually do it? Like, how are we going to leave here today and go, I'm going to forgive? Right? I'm going to give you what I thought about calling 3 easy steps, but that would be a lie. They're not easy. But these are 3 keys. If you understand these and really get these in your head and in your heart, forgiveness will be a little bit more doable. Right? Understand that grace is greater than repayment. When you guys were kids, were you taught that, like, if you did something wrong and you hurt somebody, what did you have to do? You had to make it right? You had to do something to make it better. And that is an awesome thing to do. Like, that is a great thing to do. If you hurt someone, you should want to make it better. You should want to do something to, but it's a horrible lesson to teach kids. It really is. Because do you know what that does? It gives them this crazy idea about how God and forgiveness works. It's where religion comes from, this idea that I've done something wrong and now I have to make it better. It's not how forgiveness works. Right? Forgiveness doesn't have to be earned. Grace doesn't have to be earned. If your forgiveness has to be earned, you need a new name for it because it isn't forgiveness. It isn't grace. Right? Now, trust is different. Trust does have to be earned. And it's true that forgiveness and grace best reflects God's grace when there's reconciliation, when there's restored relationships, but that isn't always possible. Some situations are just too bad, too dangerous, and you need to step back. You can still forgive without putting yourself in a place where you're going to continue to get hurt. It's okay to let trust be earned, but never grace, never forgiveness. Look at verse 27 of that story Jesus told. Right? The master was filled with pity for him. He released him and forgave his debt. He didn't okay, you know what? Break it down into monthly payments for you, a lower monthly, I'll waive the interest. He forgave the debt, completely erased it. It was gone, no more. So we have to stop expecting the people who hurt us to make it better before we can forgive them. Grace is also greater than revenge. Revenge is that desire. I hope it's not just in my heart. I hope some of you guys feel this too. Or when someone hurts you, you daydream about all the bad things you want to happen to them. You daydream about hurting them in the way they hurt you. You broke my toy? One night when you're sleeping, I'm going to break into your room and I'm going to take your favorite unicorn stuffed animal and I'm going to rip it in half. It's vendetta from childhood. It's okay. It was my sister. It's not creepy. Revenge is when you think you know what that person deserves and you want to give it to them. You want to play the judge. You want to play God in their life. Right? Paul says in Romans 12 that we need to not seek revenge, but instead leave it to God. Because God can judge justly. God can judge fairly. In fact, God is the perfect judge. And every sin ever committed against him and others will be punished, either in Christ on the cross for those who have put their faith in him, or in hell for those who think, you know what, now I'm going to try and pay my own debt. But you have no part in that. I have no part in that. God didn't say, all right, go enact your revenge. You're my righteous judge now. I was watching a horror movie. I don't recommend watching it unless you really like horror movies because it wasn't even a good one. It's called Deliver Us from Evil. And there's this scene where this cop and this priest are talking. I know it sounds like a bad joke, but the cop tells the priest about this time where he beat a man to death because that man did horrible things to children and killed several of them. And the cop said he deserved it. It was justice. And the priest's line really made me think. What he said to him was, no, what you gave him wasn't justice. It was vengeance. And vengeance always destroys the avenger. Whatever you think that person deserves, you can't give it to them. I know most of us, our revenge is probably a lot less than killing someone. It's hating them in our hearts, saying mean things behind their back, maybe putting their stapler in Jell-O, lame things. But Jesus says, if you hate your brother in your heart, it's as bad as killing him. Anything you give from the hate and unforgiveness in your heart is not justice, no matter how much you think that person deserves it. It is always revenge, and revenge just poisons you. Let's look at verse 27 again, right? Because the master didn't just forgive the debt, he released him. He didn't say, I'm going to forgive your debt, but I'm going to grab you by the throat, and I'm going to just take my anger out on you, because I'm not letting the situation go. He released him. Released him. Let him go completely. We need to do that. Because grace isn't grace if we're still holding on to that anger and trying to get our revenge. Grace is also greater than your resentment. And resentment is that feeling that some of you may have had all morning as soon as that person's face popped into your head and you started playing over and over and over again the horrible thing that they did to hurt you. But resentment has been described as like drinking a bottle of poison and expecting the other person to die. How effective is that? It's like, you know what? I hate you. Glug, 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 glug. I drank all this poison. Now let's see how long it takes for you to drop dead. It's never going to happen. All it's going to do is destroy you from the inside. I'm like, believe me, I get it. And I know, probably feeling a little bit uncomfortable thinking, man, I know I've got so much unforgiveness towards that person, and it hurts and it sucks. But it doesn't hurt as much as the thought of letting them go and forgiving them. And I get it. For the last over a year, I've been struggling with unforgiveness so deep that it wrecked me. Like I was depressed. I was more or less fake most of the time because inside I felt cold and hollow. I was angry. All the love I had for people was blocked off. I couldn't feel. And over the summer, God showed me why that was. He showed me this area where I was just blocking off all of God's goodness because I knew he would be asking me to forgive this person and I didn't want to. And this summer, God told me, Robbie, I need you to remember how much I've forgiven you of. And then I need you to forgive your ex-aunt for killing your uncle. And it was hard. And I'm going to admit to you, I didn't want to do it. So if you're feeling like, man, I know I need to forgive, but I don't want to, you are not alone. It isn't easy. But how, when we look at the grace of God, when we look at all that Jesus went through for us, How can we not forgive, no matter how bad the hurt? How can we look at God and say, God, I was so horrible to you. I turned my back on you when you offered me life and love. And I tried to do things my own way, and I hurt you and I hurt other people. And you actually came and were betrayed and were beaten and were arrested and crucified, nailed to a cross to die just so you could forgive me. How can we look at that and not be ready to forgive anything anyone does to us? The pain that you feel from that unforgiveness you're holding isn't going to go away by holding on to it tighter. It's a toxin, and it's poisoning you from the inside. And the only way it's going to go is if you let that grace that God is pouring into you flow freely and wash those toxins away. Forgive as we've been forgiven. That's why Jesus tells us in Luke, I say love your enemies. Do good to those who hate you. Bless those who curse you. Pray for those who hurt you. Because that's what he did. That's what he did when he came to die, that we'd be forgiven. Right? And he knows that when we walk like that, when we live like Jesus, forgive like Jesus, when we love our enemies and pray for those who hate us, that his grace flows freely and we find freedom. So is it going to be easy to forgive? No. I'm not going to lie and say it's going to be easy. Is it going to be worth it? Oh yeah. Are you going to find freedom when you can forgive and show grace to those people who've hurt you? Yeah. Because grace is greater than your hurts. It is greater. God's grace is so much greater than all of those things that have been done to you. So how do we do this? How do we do this? Well, the only way we're going to be able to forgive is if we stop thinking about the things that have been done to us and start remembering the things Jesus did for us. In fact, Jesus gave us a beautiful way to remember his grace, to remember what he went through on the cross so that he could forgive us. It's called communion, and in just a minute we're going to take communion together to remember just how far Jesus went to forgive us. Just what he went through. All that pain and all that suffering that was inflicted on him on the cross so that we could be forgiven of so much. Because when we remember that, when we say, Jesus, I can't believe what you went through for me. When we get our eyes fixed on Jesus and the cross and the love he has for us, those other hurts, well, they might still be big. They're nothing in comparison. In your worship guide, you should have a sheet that looks like this, different colors, because we want to make this look pretty. Right? This is grace is greater than blank. Today, when you come up to get communion, I want you to come forward, receive communion to remember God's forgiveness of you, the grace that he's shown you. And then I want you to take this with your hurt written on it, with the name of that person you need to release, that pain you need to forgive. Fold it up so no one has to see, and just stick it in the basket on these two tables. You receive God's grace, and then you let it flow. It won't be easy, but you'll feel lighter. You'll feel that weight of that hurt, that pain, that unforgiveness in your heart being lifted off of you. So I'd like to invite the serving communion to come forward and set up. Before I give you guys the practical instructions, I want to encourage you, if you are here today and you have not received God's grace for yourself, make this your moment. Make this the moment where you say, God, like I messed up, but you went through all of that for me. You went to the cross and died a painful, bloody death so that you could forgive me. Like, I want to follow you. I want to give my life to you. I want to let your grace pour out on me so I can let it flow into those around me. Make that your moment. Come forward today and take this communion to remember what Jesus did for you. Make this the moment where your relationship with him starts, where you receive for the first time his grace and experience the transformation it brings to your life. Because that's what this communion is. It's for us who've put our faith in Jesus to remember what he did for us and how everything we have to forgive is so much less than what he forgave us for. Right. So while we take communion, we're gonna continue to worship God together. I'm gonna ask you guys come forward when you're ready, when you've got that hurt written down and you're ready to just come remind yourself of all that God did for you. Those in the inner two seating sections, come to the front via the inner aisle, receive from the station in front of you, and then return to your seats via these two center aisles here. There's trash receptacles there to drop your cups in. Make sure you stop at that table and drop your hurt in there on your way. Those of you in the outer two seating sections, you're going to come forward via the outer aisles, receive from the station in front of you, and return to your seats via those inner aisles. And hands up if you're the station with gluten-free. This is your option if you are gluten-free, right? Because ain't no gluten sensitivity is going to be stopping you from coming and remembering what Jesus did for you. Right. I'm going to pray. Let's take communion together, guys. Father, thank you so much that despite all our mistakes, that massive debt of sin we owed you, that you sent Jesus to die for us, for his body to be broken so that we could be made whole, so that we could find healing, for his blood to be spilled so that all our sins would be forgiven, and we could live in relationship with you, a relationship of grace where we don't have to earn it, we just have to receive it. God, thank you that you never ask us to forgive more than we've been forgiven of. Lord, thank you that you don't want us to walk around with those heavy weights of unforgiveness in our heart. That you want us to be free. That you want your grace to just flow through us. God, thank you that it is impossible to forgive some of these things on our own strength, but with you, we can do it, God. Jesus, thank you that you are the one working through us. Lord, we remember what you did. And as we remember what you went through to forgive us from all of that sin, all of those mistakes, all of those hurts we caused you and caused others, let us forgive. Let us drop those weights. Let us release those people who hurt us to you. Let us forgive that pain and just give it to you and walk away free